Salina, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jim and welcome to the Sounds German review of the new Schattenmann album, which is called Licht an. This is the debut album of the 2016 formed quartet, which lured me with the promise of Neue Deutsche Härte 2.0. And before we get to the album itself, I just have to clear this up, and I mean this without any judgment here. This is some PR bullshit. These guys make metal with a heavy dose of electronic elements in it, but they certainly don't invent the wheel anew. I don't know if this was meant as a marketing stunt by the label or the band, or if someone really thinks that's what they do, but these guys walk pretty well treaded ground throughout the whole album, and they certainly don't elevate the genre to some new heights. As I said before, however, this is not meant as a comment on the quality of the album itself. As mentioned, these guys make metal music with a heavy electronic slant to it, and except for the last track, which is an unplugged version of the third song on this album, this is the red line drawn throughout all of the almost 50-minute long disc. Just right when you start playing it, the very first track, the eponymous Licht an, starts you off with some synthy sounds and fast electric beat before you hear any guitars, drums or bass. Usually we'll find both things go on at the same time, and I found it quite clever how Schattenmann mixed the two styles together. You will have parts that are exclusively one or the other, but usually you will have the metal and electronic mixed together at the same time. You can find all kinds of electronic sounds going on between the hammering riffs and stoic drums. I also feel that the mix is very well done in that regard. It strikes a good balance between the two, with no side ever dominating or overplaying the other one. The general topic of this album is the darkness lurking inside of us, which I found to be packed more clever sometimes than others. Most of the tracks, like the aforementioned opener or the song Schattenmann, are really as on the nose as you can get, and if you want subtle lyrics, well, you ain't getting them here. Simple as that. And I know this is their debut, and I do seriously hope this gets better over time with some more experience under their belt, but some of the writing was just dreadful in terms of the lyrics, mostly in terms of rhyming, which seems to be forced with very simple, very obvious rhyme dictionary hit 1 levels here, which puzzles me all the more because many times they just relinquish it altogether and the lyrics work all the same. I would argue even better at times than those lines with, let's call it, house mouse rhyme quality. So I really don't know why they felt the need to so often obviously push and force in the rhyming, but I don't feel it did the album any favors. However, in terms of compositions, I did kinda like what I heard on here for the very most part. I enjoyed the mix Schattenmann brings to the table generally speaking, but I also have to admit nothing really stuck with me. Going back to this whole Neue Deutsche Härte 2.0 spiel, it just comes off as a bit generic. Like stuff I have heard before time and again, and the album is lacking anything to make them really stand out from the mass. You have a nice little sort of metal ballad about love with Gekentert. The song comes along with a pumping slow beat and clean guitars for the verses and all kinds of nautical metaphors, while it all kicks in more heavily for the hook. This song is also basically the closing track in an unplugged version, which, to be honest, left me lukewarm though. Sure, the track works just fine with an acoustic guitar, some soft percussions and a rattle and even some string instruments thrown in, but as far as unplugged arrangements go, this is pretty much par for the course, I would say. 9mm, on the other hand, indulges in a bit of some violent power fantasy about taking revenge on those that wronged you. Kicks off with a really driving, hammering beat, which then interjects first the guitars before, after a few more seconds, the rest of the instrumentation comes into play. Fittingly for the topic, it has a pretty hard atmosphere to it, and I really loved the synthy line in the hook here. And vocalist Frank Herzig sounds adequately mean on this track too, where I found his vocals to be a bit lackluster here and there, it just comes off like he thinks he sounds more evil than he really does in the end. And then there is Generation Sex, which is the dud of the disc. Like, dear God, I found the premise of the track really interesting, how teenagers get sexualized earlier and earlier in their lives nowadays. I think they could have made a really great piece of social critique with that foundation. But holy shit, did they botch that. First of all, it has this just irritating voice in the hook, which also is played in the beginning of the track as the first thing. I guess they tried to make it sound like the voice of a kid or something, but it's just grating to the ears. And then they just list some obscenities and fetishes, and I just couldn't believe what I heard here over the chorus hook and short strummed riffing. That thing just basically loses all meaning, and I don't know who heard this and thought this track was good to go like this. It's just. Sorry, it's just horrible. The album would have been better off without it entirely. I'm happy to say though that this was really the only track where I felt like this. The rest of the album delivers you a constantly solid mix of metal and electronic music. Nothing else is really as bad, but as I said before, it also lacks something to make it stand out in the end. Mixing metal and electronic music is simply nothing new, and after them promising taking the music to new levels, I simply expected more. Like a lot more. At the same time though, this is really far from the worst debut ever, and I saw bands with decades of experience release worse material than Schattenmann did here. I definitely think this is a solid foundation to start with. And given the inherent diversity that comes along with electronic music, I can see them going really interesting places in future. They are just not there yet. So, as a conclusion, Schattenmann's debut overall left me lukewarm in the end. For the most part, I liked what I heard while it was playing, but barely anything just stuck. Licht an might not be the greatest album, it certainly isn't the most innovative one, but it's also far from being bad. Most of what it does and what it feels like it aimed to do, it does relatively competently. Even though they stripped out the industrial core inherent to the Neue Deutsche Härte genre, the mechanics are still there. So if you dig bands like Rammstein or maybe Oomph, or generally just the fusion of metal and electronic music and are itching for new material there, I think this album is worthwhile checking out, and you should probably keep an eye on the band itself, because I certainly can see them delivering very interesting material in future. Just, as I said before, they're just not there yet. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you did, please leave a thumbs up on the video, and if you didn't like it, we have a button for that too. And if you have listened to this album, feel free to tell me in the comments what you thought about it. And if you want at least one weekly music review from an artist or band you probably never heard about before, just subscribe to the channel. You can also follow Sounds German on Facebook or Twitter. I do usually post daily new music videos on there from all kinds of artists. I hope to see you again next time. Have a nice day. Salida.